you'll come and try it like online easily. So as long as you know what to look like, then you're fine. Well, apparently we're live, by the way, so
Oh, cool.
that'll be a smooth start. Like we already started our live stream Q&A, and we haven't even launched the thing yet. The best kind to start. So let's make a start, guys. Yep. So we might as well do it now. Welcome, we're on camera now. Welcome, people. We're on our a monthly Q&A. We have right here with us our special guest for today, Jarryd. Jarryd is an archery coach and runs Rogue Archery up in Queensland. So hello, Jarryd. Welcome to the stream.
Good morning.
And of course, you've been very active yourself on the social media pages, on your Facebook and on YouTube as well. So definitely we'll have to give a shout out and plug to Jarryd's social media and website and channel a bit later on. But of course, we're here in very unusual circumstances. I'm sure many of us are kind of stuck at home, kind of getting that archery bug, and probably wondering what the hell we want to do in the next few weeks. And I know personally I've had a lot of trouble kind of maintaining that motivation, that training routine. And I'm sure there are hundreds, thousands of you out there who are probably going through the same kind of mental processes. So I want to welcome all our guests for coming in. I know we've got a few people coming in right now. Our timing's a little different, but it may suit you more where you are. So if you're in chat right now, give a shout where you're from. I think we've got quite a few Europeans, quite a few North Americans perhaps. So hopefully this will reach you in time. If not, if you're watching afterwards, then hopefully you enjoy our stream for today. So of course, as usual, anyone who is watching, feel free to throw in questions. Our theme for today is training and coaching, especially the philosophy and mindset of coaching. And we'll be getting a few specific things later on. So if you are having any issues or any concerns or questions about your archery training, this is the chance to ask. Always like asking people with more experience than I have, and Jarryd's definitely one of them. So let's start with the origin story, Jarryd. So how'd you get to archery? What's your story?
Oh, that's a long story. I started archery when I was about 15, and I remember it because, I guess the first time I started archery, I was about 4 years old, and someone bought me an Indian set, just like everyone else. And then, I don't know, I remember one of my family friends signed up for a beginner's course, and it was close to my house, so, his parents spoke to my parents, and then they asked if I wanted to go along, so I thought, hell yeah. Went along, had a crack, absolutely loved it, and then just kept going back. And so after a few weeks, I just kept going back and back and back. And then eventually, one of the local coaches just sort of came up, tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, look, mate, you clearly don't know what you're doing, but you got some talent. You should come and train with me. And so that was my coach. That was just jumped on board, and never looked back.
I find it interesting how important this first step. I mean, as a coach, I kind of say the same thing to everybody. A top secret, by the way, say the same thing to every single person who comes in.
Yes.
But it's kind of like that the first touch. I mean, I remember my first time going to club, same sort of thing. Like I probably looked like I'd half knew. I've never done archery before. I was like 23 when I started, so I was really late in the game. And I met a very good coach. He used to work with the national side as well. So he when he said, I remember very very clearly. He told me, look, he was rating beginners, right? It's kind of like, oh, you're like a 6 out of 10. And so, oh, you're not bad. How about me? He looked at me and went, you're a 4 out of 10. I went, but he said, well, compared to what's top archers. I went, ooh, okay, that feels better. That's a good feedback. So that means I'm like an 8 out of 10, or it should be. So yeah, if you want to be that way, sure. Yeah, but that first touch from someone who's also been in the game for a long time is such a huge motivating factor, and I'm pretty sure that's how we carry ourselves when we're coaching as well. So you've done archery, done your first few sessions. Your coach just said, "Come train with me," or we'll do a bit more. So what then?
Okay, so this is really interesting because this is where I kind of deviated from like the normal path. My coach Rick, who is still one of my best mates, is one of the best men at my wedding. We're still really super close, but his approach was very, very rigid. And Rick's mentality, which sort of rubbed off on me a little bit, was that you don't do things half-assed. It's only 0 or 110, right? So he basically took the bow out of my hands and then gave me this little piece of poly pipe and string, okay, which is
Oh,
like a
yep,
training
yep.
bow. Yeah. And then stood me in front of a mirror and we started doing these drills. And, um, you know, at first it was like a little odd that you come to archery training and don't actually shoot, you know.
Hmm.
But now, looking back on that, I recognize how valuable that was because for the first sort of 12, 16 weeks, it was really drilled into me that kind of fundamentals of like strong technique structure. And that's been like that like really accelerated my learning curve and allowed me to kind of like leapfrog right up to the sort of a competitive level very, very fast. So, in the first 6 months, it was pretty much very, very heavy SPT focus. You're starting with a lightweight and then progressively building that up. And then started shooting a blank butt and then built it out in distance. And after about 6 months of doing that sort of thing, my club at the time was hosting the national championships. So
Ooh, nice.
I've never shot a competition before, never even shot a club shoot. I'd just been doing all these drills in front of a mirror, right? And my coach was like, "Let's throw you in the deep end, mate. Let's
Yeah,
see how you
nationals, why
do.
not?
Sink or swim." Yeah. And so I signed up for the national championships, and no expectation. I was, scared. And then because I hadn't even shot a score before, back in those days, how they did it was they decided your target allocation and they kind of grouped you with the people who were about the same level as you.
Hmm.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. And so because I'd never posted a score before, I was like right down the bottom and I was the only person who never posted a score.
Hmm.
So they didn't even put me with my competitors. They put me next to them with the women.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't even shooting with my division. Um, but I think there was like 36 competitors in my division, and I placed top five. And so that was sort of like the first moment I realized that I can do this.
Ooh, and especially
Yeah,
like the first taste in the
yeah,
competition. Like I mean, my experience is very similar. It took me like 1, 2, even 3 years for us to shot my first competition, and a lot of us at our club are very shoot shy, like competition shy. So you just
yeah,
turn up with
yeah.
your bow, and like we say, oh no, we've got a club comp happening next week. So, yeah, I don't know, I've got something better to do. And everyone I've brought to their first cup is want to do another one, and
Mm,
we've never had that momentum where we've had enough people go to these things. But it's like, the first time you go, it's not as bad as it looks because even at nationals, it's like a lot of people, but it's still the
exactly.
same thing that you do. That's interesting. We've got a quick question in chat which I wanted to answer. What
Yeah.
was your first bow?
Oh, my first bow. My first riser was a win and win. I think it was a WinX back in the day.
Oh yeah, the Winexes,
And that
yeah,
that was when they had the like elliptical limb alignment systems that you could
yeah.
never get quite right. So that was my first bow. And I think I got sick of fiddling with the limb alignment system, so I ended up borrowing my coach's bow, and I shot a Hoyt Axis for many years. So I've
Ah.
still got one of them. It's top notch.
Nice. All right. So we've had our first national experience. What then?
Um, so I guess that was like the slingshot into competition. And then, from there, I could sort of continued along that trajectory for quite a while. And, within that year, I think I shot the IFA World Championships, won that in the youth division. And then I went on, and the next year I came back and I won that youth national championships. And then I sort of, continued along like that. Um, and yeah, from there, it was like a pretty rapid, I had a lot of success in those sort of cadet, junior, youth sort of years. I set a few national records, won a bunch of competitions, that sort of thing. Um, and then obviously then progressed through into the open men's, and that's where I had a bit of success. So I did quite well in a lot of competitions, got selected for a few national squads. But I took some time off when I was in university. Um, I guess I just, my training team sort of fell apart, and I didn't really have that support structure around me that I had when I was just starting out. And so, it's not all peaches and rainbows and unicorns because, I've done very well, but I've also made every mistake in the book. I've gone to international competitions and totally bombed out and like lost things and just failed to meet my expectations and all things like that. So at the time, it's really hard to work through that when you have, you're young, you have a high ego, you benchmark yourself against, winning everything, and then you go and get trounced in an international competition, and it's like a real blow. But that's also how I've learned. I've learned from those experiences. So I think, it's important, because if I didn't have those experiences, I wouldn't be the coach or the archer that I am today.
I agree too. Like, I think, yeah, when I started, my first 3 years was really ego fueling. Like you
Yes,
start shooting
yeah.
your personal best, you start sitting around, you start becoming the best in your club, and especially clubs really small, like 3E's number one. So, I'm like, yeah, all right, I'm shooting really well. You get to comp me like, I'm top 10 out of 10. So, maybe. That sort of thing. I think more. I mean, recently in my comps, and like, as long as I turn up, I'm pretty happy.
Yes.
But I think when you start off, you expect a bit more of yourself. And some people really rise to it.
Mm.
Some people kind of don't really handle that well. And I think I'm more the latter sort of person. I'm like, you know what? Let's stop putting the heavy burdens, because unless I'm training to be that level, I shouldn't expect magical scores.
But
Um,
you raised something really important there, because, archery is a niche sport, right?
hmm,
And so it's very easy to sometimes, build up and associate success with just winning everything.
hmm,
But one of the things that I learned over time is that if you're winning every single competition you're going in, you're in the wrong competitions.
hmm,
You know what I mean? No
yeah.
one, yeah, you're not challenging yourself, you're not pushing yourself. And it's sometimes easy, particularly at a local level, even, club, state level, that sort of thing. It's quite easy to, early on, clean up and be quite dominant in that small pool.
Hmm.
But then quite a lot of archers, like you said, jump up to that next level, and then it's like a real shock to the system. And that was certainly the case for me, and I see this happening all the time. So I think it's important to just have that perspective when you are coming up through the ranks.
Yeah, and I think I stopped competing for like years, and then I went
Mm.
to the national indoor, the world indoors in Sydney. And I was like, oh, this is
Yeah,
cool. Got
yeah,
like all the national team there, like David Barnes and Ryan Tyack, and especially Taylor Worth, man. I was watching him from the back, and I was like, whoa, these guys are like the level. Like you can see why they're good.
yeah, yeah.
I was
They're
actually
good.
like trying to see his pre-match warm up. He was like playing like mobile games on his phone, and I'm like, okay, I should do it. It's really the mental game, especially indoors, so
Yes,
intense. Just watching the mental side, I got more from watching people at a competition rather than doing it myself. I did it. I'm like, oh, this is cool. This is pretty fun. But seeing
absolutely.
top tier was really good too. So it really brings that side in. I have a quick question, by the way. This is from Gabrielle in chat. So
Yep.
you talked about how you were doing archery in university. The question is, did doing archery help you focus in university? Did it actually help your studies?
Um, I think archery has helped me in many ways. It did. I think it did help me focus and to develop that mindset of being, uh, like a goal-driven person. So,
Mm,
um, you know, I think that approach of, say, breaking the shot down, spending that time and, working on those fundamentals, just in front of a mirror, for example, grinding away, just perfecting those little minute details. Um, you do learn a degree of focus and dedication and things like that translates well to other areas and studies, certainly. Um, and I think one of the principles, this is just my personality now, but I'm very, a results focused person. So I always had a hard time, um, sort of in not a hard time in academic studies, but keeping focused on the bigger picture. When sometimes, I'm studying civil engineering, we're doing, Fourier transfer equations, and it's hard to kind of connect that with the end result. And that's something that I think archery helped me do, was associate, the process with sort of
mm.
the end result. Does
I would
that
agree
answer the
too.
question?
I think like what Coach Jordan to me is about process. Like just a process, process,
Mm,
process. He just always said process. Don't worry about the result. Don't care about where the
that's
arrows
right.
land. It's all about process. And I think since then I adopted that into my teaching. I always teach my students process. I don't care about the final result. I want how you got there.
I
Yeah.
think that's so valuable, like, in anything, right? Whether you're learning how to, drive a car or play the piano or shoot a bow, or, whether it's in your studies or in your work life, your career, whatever, focus on the growth, focus
Mm.
on the process. The result is just a side effect of that.
Absolutely.
Do you,
Okay. Yeah. No,
yeah,
process is super important. We'll probably come back
yeah,
to a bit
yeah,
later for our coaching and training as
definitely,
well.
yeah.
I'll say hi to Akil in chat, by the way, from Kenya. Nice to hear from you over there.
Awesome.
Big fan of us both, apparently.
Oh, cool.
We'll take your question a bit later. I think it's more to do with coaching, more to do
Yeah.
with KSL, especially. So we'll talk about it a bit later, perhaps. But nice that you checked in as well. By the way, if you're new in chat, shout where you're from. Because some Canadians, got one from the UK, I think, from Poland, and we've got one from Kenya. So fantastic! Great to see you
Awesome.
guys
Yeah.
joining in around the world. Okay, so I think we're still in your art journey. So you've gone through your nationals. Where to from there?
I guess, the next big milestone for me, and we touched on it before, was when I got selected for my first Open Men's national team, which was I think the World Field Championships. Um, and that one, I went along to that and didn't perform. So again, that was really an important um, moment for me because I had to do some soul searching when I came back from that.
Mm.
And what I realized was that, I created this identity for myself and put this pressure on myself that, hey, I expect to win every competition. Um, and then when you're competing at that level, that's not, that's so if you define success by winning, and I at that stage was like, I want to be Olympic gold medalist, right? Which is a very worthy goal. But if you define success as Olympic gold, then there's always like a differential of that, which is like, if you don't get Olympic gold, you're a failure,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And if that's your perspective, almost everyone is a failure, right? So it kind of isn't that a miserable way, like a miserable
Yeah,
perspective?
it's kind of like I see what you're saying because you approach archery as an individual sport. It's just kind of on the back of like if you're the best in your club, the best in your state, then that's a small pool to work from. So like
Yeah.
like I'm succeeding, therefore my first or my every world event I go to, I'll also succeed. But there's 100 other people with the same mindset because they've all come from the same background. I'm the best of my club, best of my state, best of my country. I'm gonna
Yes.
win gold medal. Well, only one person can win in the end. So
Yeah.
every like the other 200 people competing in the same division have the same drive. So you can't
Yeah. Yeah.
expect every single person to win gold on the back of that kind of like that backstory. So you need to kind of like I
Exactly.
like that. That's a really
And
nice humbling experience.
it,
So
it, it,
you obviously you've underperformed in your first few. You've changed expectations. Where to from there?
well, I wouldn't say a change expectations. I would say change perspective,
Okay.
right? Because it's still important when you're an athlete and you're competing at a competitive level.
Mm.
You still have the ambition or the goal to win. That's a worthy goal. Um, but the perspective is now that it's a journey, right? And for me, I now define success as more about that growth and that sort of development, learning opportunity, and being challenged and that sort of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So um, I guess just to give a brief overview, I started off young and then, full of ego like everyone is and testosterone, I just wanted to win everything. And then it's sort of been a progressive journey to sort of get to where I am now, where it's all about, I enjoy shooting, I enjoy competing, I enjoy, um, being challenged. And yeah, does that answer the question?
I think it does. I think the big part, anyone watching chat right now probably agree with this, right? A lot of us who are starting, especially young, I know Eliza, you're very young at the moment, and you probably have the same mindset where you always have this mindset that I want to win everything. That's what we said
Yes.
before, right? So I think the thing to take away from this is it's like when you do your first if you mean like tapped on the shoulder by your coach or you make a state team or national team, you have very high ambitions. Not everyone gets it first time around, right? I think you go from I'm gonna win everything to I'm gonna do everything and do as best as I can. Right? I'm gonna win
Mm,
everything because winning is reserved for like the very few who perform on the day, and in the end, you can still it's like we say, archery is a marathon, not a sprint. So it's about long term drive and long term performance and form around there, and doing really, really, really well on the day. So
yes. And,
that's
and and I think just to sort of touch on that, I think you mentioned something important. Like winning, of course, winning is a goal. Like you want to win, right? But it's not like one of the things that I see a lot in my archers now that I'm a coach is that if you have a goal of, say, winning a certain event, you might go into that event, you want to win your state championships, for example, and you might shoot a personal best, might have been the previous, state record or whatever, and you can still come second. Okay,
Yeah.
and that doesn't mean it's a bad performance or failure, does it?
No, of course
You
not.
know, so I guess that's the sort of perspective I'm trying to provide, is that it's relative to yourself, and that your growth and your performance can be benchmarked on other things other than just winning every single thing you're in, because
Mm.
and if you want to get to a top level, that's necessary, because again, no one wins every single World Cup, Olympics, whatever, right? So along the journey, you're gonna have to learn and develop through the ranks. It's going to be a grind, through
I
some
think
phases of that.
even the extreme example. Looked at Brady Ellison last year. He
Yeah,
got like perfect for the Vegas indoor,
yeah,
absolute shot perfection.
yes,
Like that's one of the performance you can't repeat. Really, that's so exceptional. He came second. He
exactly,
came second at the end. So in the
exactly,
shoot
yeah.
off. So I mean, like the people will remember the perfect score. They don't remember he came second. He came first in every other event, but he came second that one event in Vegas.
That's right,
But the point
that's
is
right.
that look, in the end, it's one arrow, one round. Who knows what will happen? So
And
that yeah.
and that comes back to what I said before. Like, if you're winning every single competition, you're in the wrong competitions.
Or you're
You're not
Brady
being
Ellison.
challenged.
All right. Oh, that's great though. So
Yeah.
obviously it's shaped a lot of your coaching mentality. So going
Yes.
going from your international experience, was there any other milestone, or have you gone back straight to coaching it from there?
Oh, no, no. I mean, I still have shot and competed for the whole time I've coached. Like, I haven't stopped shooting
Mm,
to start coaching, for example. Um, and so that's something that is probably a little bit different in the way I coach as well, because I try and create like a team atmosphere. Like, archery is a very
ah,
individual sport sometimes, and I try and create like a team culture where we're all sort of training buddies, training together, very supportive. That's kind of the environment that I
it's kind of
love
like
and I try and create. Yeah.
in like team sports, you kind of have the player coach kind of role, right? You have the person who's managing and coaching, and also playing with the team. Most times the coach is kind of hands off, but
Yeah, and
still get
there's
yeah.
some that's right. There's some nuance to it as well. Like, I've learned some things over the years, because you do have to, in some ways, maintain authority.
Mm,
You can't just be one of the guys in some aspects, otherwise it's hard to maintain discipline in a
yeah.
team, and things can start to unravel. Um, and so there's a balance. But I've also found that when my archers have been most successful has been when I'm training and I'm basically that role model.
Mm,
So I'm setting that. I'm I'm not just saying do what I say. I'm actually saying here's what do what I do. I'm
yeah.
leading by
Yeah.
example. I'm actually, in our group chat, I'm actually posting every week my training program as I would expect them to do, so that they can see here's the training that I'm doing. Here's my level of compliance of the schedule that I've written out for myself, and that sort of thing. And that's when my team does best, because yeah, I'm that role model to them as well.
Ooh, nice.
So there's more to coaching than just the
Yeah,
technical aspect. It's yeah.
that's pretty huge. Probably segue with the coaching very shortly. Got a quick question from Jack. A couple of questions.
Mm.
Yeah, obviously you should recurve. Have you shot bare bow or compound?
Not competitively or seriously. Like, I've had a go. But yeah, yeah, I've never actually gone through the process of, yeah, learning to shoot one or the other competitively. But it's interesting. I've talked to a lot of coaches and archers from different disciplines,
Mm,
and what I find very interesting is the similarities across disciplines.
yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think there's a lot you can learn.
Do you want to talk a bit about rogue archery and what you're doing right now?
Yeah, yeah. So Rogue Archery is basically an archery school in Brisbane. Um, and I started that up, I think, first in about 2013. Um, and the background to that was, it was an idea that I had for years. And it was really about going out there and promoting the sport of archery, because you don't really find archery unless you go searching for it.
Mm,
You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
And so I wanted to go out and kind of promote it. It's just such an awesome sport. And so I created this mobile archery courses where we went out to schools and done a lot of work with the PCYC, which is a community group here.
Mm,
Does a lot of work with the youth and that sort of thing. And through that, what we've done is we've created like basically a curriculum for beginners to come in, and they do, like, say, a school term worth of lessons. And over that term, we introduce them to the basics of technique, and then, keep it pretty fun, teach them how to score, do some competitions and challenges and shooting games and things. But also, by the end of that curriculum, they should have an idea whether or not they sort of want to continue with it as a sport, Not everyone does, but the ones who do, we filter. We try and encourage them into the clubs and then offer like a coaching pathway. So, uh, that's something that I'm really passionate about because I want to create something that I wish was there for me when I started.
Mm.
I was really lucky to have Rick, like an awesome coach who was that mentor to me and like a training buddy and had that athletic background to sort of guide me through it. But you know, I think a lot of people slip through the cracks. And yeah, I just
Yeah,
wanted to
yeah.
create a resource and a pathway that I wish was there for me. Basically, that's my
And
motivation.
I think I agree with the coach too. One of the tough things is pathways. Like
Yeah,
we get a very high level of engagement in the first few sessions because it's brand new. People
yeah,
always want to do it. They've seen it on TV and they always want
yep,
to do it themselves. And then they realize, oh, there's actual training involved. And they buy the first bow, and then they just realize they're not going to get the immediate Robin Hood results. And you have the starter, you have like the national shooter, and in between, they're like, hey, where's everybody else, kind of sort of thing. So I think, even from
Well,
a statewide or nationwide point of view, it's kind of one of the weaknesses in the sport. It's always the first touch and the top shooter, but very little between to bridge that pathway.
that's exactly right. And I think before when we're talking about results and expectations, I think this is where people's expectations are most misaligned. Um, and it's important to acknowledge not everyone wants to be a competitive archer or Olympic champion or whatever, but it surprises me when I sit down with archers and I ask them, "What's your goal? What do you want to do?" It surprises me how many people actually do, want to or have aspirations towards being a competitive archer or they want to shoot at a top level.
Mm.
But when we start to unpack what that actually takes to get to that level, that's where it starts to unravel for them because they think it's about their natural ability.
Mm.
They're top of their beginner's course because they just, they pick it up easily.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, that's great, but there's a lot more involved in taking it all the way through to that elite level. And I always like to use the metaphor of like boxing, right? And if you were to take up boxing as a sport, tell me, what would you do on your first lesson? Would you, jump in the ring and start fighting someone?
Mm.
Not at all, right?
Mm.
Your first lesson, you're probably going to be skipping. You might hit a bag. You're going to be doing push-ups and burpees and stuff like that to build conditioning. You're going to do thousands of crunches. After weeks or months, you might introduce, some combinations with the pads. You might learn how to use a speed ball or whatever. You're
Mm.
just going to be learning fundamentals, and it's going to be weeks or months and months of hard work grinding away before you actually even step in the ring and start sparring with an opponent,
That's right.
right? But
Yeah.
archers expect to skip all of that step and just jump and just shoot, right? And just jump straight to the
That's
end
something so
and kind of
fascinating
bypass
too.
all that.
Yeah, I agree. Because like basically every sport you get into, it's conditioning first.
Yes.
Every sport, I've done like acrobatics. I tried to anyway.
Yeah.
Like any gymnastics, but any physical sport, like you can't get in the ring unless you are physically able to first. So you have to
That's
condition
right.
yourself to last more than 15 seconds if anything happens. And but
And
that I think that barrier where most sports you need to enter it and then do the prep work first. You can't go straight to the match condition. I mean, at best you might be playing a very casual version. You might be playing like in the backyard, footy. Just, playing, just passing the ball around, playing cricket, backyard cricket. There's no barrier for entry there. But no one plays a full match on the first day. It's mostly just tossing the ball around. And that's what I think is a big difference in archery is archery, most people see it as I can hold a bow, I can pull
yeah.
it back, I can hit this 5 meter target. So
And so
therefore
if it's like the logic of if I just shoot more, I'll get better at shooting, right?
yeah.
But that's like being that's why I love boxing because it's like, all right, if I just find more people, I'll just be better at boxing, right?
Yeah, if I
Well,
punch more people, I'll be better at punching.
realistically, you're just going to get punched in the nose until you
Yeah.
lose hope and give up. And that is, I think, like it's a minor tragedy that's what most of the pathway is in the sport of archery as well.
Yeah,
Um,
we've kind of geared people up at for the come and try is a bit too easy in sort of ways, right? The success criteria is very low. I mean, as long as you listen to what the instructor says for 5 minutes, you'll hit bullseyes. 10 out of 10.
yeah,
Yeah, and some people in the first lesson will do that. they'll absolutely hammer it, right? Whereas like,
Yeah.
obviously most people are either you are shooting over the target, like most shots, or you're hitting the target every single time. There's no like in between anyway. So basically either you can't anchor and therefore you miss, or you've watched the new Sensei video and you can anchor every single shot, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I've seen it a lot. I watch people go, you look really good. Yeah, I watch your video. It's like, all right, fair enough. Yeah, teach yourself, guy. But that's the thing, right? So, like, the success criteria, we give people such an easy way in, which is a good thing. We want to grow the sport, get people be interested. But because that first taste is so light and easy, it kind of lulls people in the sense of, I'll buy $1,000 bow, and then I'll shoot 70 meters, I'll start getting world records. Well, actually, no, there's a lot more you didn't see. I also mention it's funny because traditionally, archery had the same conditioning and, like, long-term development. Like, I've talked to people who teach, like, Turkish archery, Korean archery, and it's always first 4 months, practice pulling the bow back, condition, and then do the other side as well with Turkish archery. So you got to do like both arms. So you have to like spend like 3 months with a rubber band or with a bow. And just you don't shoot a single arrow for 3 months. But of course, in our current society, in our culture, we can't really spend 3 months of not doing archery. You can't tease someone. It's like, here's a bow, here's a
really
target,
interesting point.
and you can't shoot for 3 months. You've got to put this rubber band for 3 months. I think the way we kind of structure our courses kind of caters for that mass mindset where we want the activity side,
Instant gratification.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. There's a lot to that to unpack because that is true, and I see a lot, particularly with teenagers. They're used to phones, social media, games, all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of push towards instant gratification, but there's also, I think, a perception that people aren't willing to do that hard work, and so we shouldn't push that on people because we'll lose them. Well, actually, I think I have a different perspective because I see people, do the beginner's course, sign up with all this enthusiasm, go out and spend $3,000 on equipment. You got the top-notch stuff, and they're super keen. They want to do well. They want to get competitive or whatever. And after 6 or 12 months, after being on a plateau that they just cannot bust through, they lose motivation and quit. That's not the goal either, right?
That's right.
And I think if people understand the progress, right, then they're actually, and they buy into it, and they understand the progression and what they're doing, I think it's actually more fulfilling to see constant progress, okay, than to just go out and shoot 70 meters as soon as possible and miss all the time until hopefully you're Olympic champion.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think it's important that's why it's important to structure the pathway so that it's progressive and that they understand that. So, when you sign up for karate, you get your white belt, and you don't get your yellow belt until you do this, and this. And people understand that. So it's laid out, it's structured, it's what you're doing, and then you go ahead and master it.
I think that segues into our next big topic, which is the focus for our streams, looking at our approaches and our philosophies of coaching and training. So I guess this is over to you. What's your angle on coaching and training philosophies?
Well, that's where do I start? How much time have we got? So I guess we already sort of touched on this a bit, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
I think my approach to coaching philosophy is that, or archery training, is that it has to be holistic. Okay, and you can't just, like we said, you can't just shoot, right?
Yeah.
Can we? Okay, this is a Q&A. Can we flip it around? Can we ask the audience a question?
Yep, go.
Is that cool?
Yeah,
okay.
yep.
So everyone dialing in, all right. Can you just take the next 20 seconds to write in all the different types of archery training that you can think of? Obviously shooting's one, right? But what else have we got?
That might be the one thing to list for most people is to shoot. But there is training, right? That's a good question, right? For those in chat right now, what are other training? Just type in chat. What do you think training is?
Yeah.
I'll give you the 20 seconds. I've got band, or what stretching band.
Read them out as they come through. Yeah, so you got stretchy band stuff.
Band.
Yep.
Okay, that's the start. It's funny that you mentioned this because most people turn up, they only shoot. I think this is what we're getting towards, right? People who do archery, they only shoot and passively become better somehow. And we always say there's a bit more than that. What else is there? Drills, assembling the bow. I guess it's a bit of a ritual. You could do that way.
It's like a "this is my rifle" sort of thing.
Let's see, blind bell shooting.
Yep, blank bell shooting. Yep, absolutely.
Nice. That's a good one. Mr. Alex, I pretty much only shoot. Yeah, that's. I think
There you go.
most people. Yeah.
Yeah. You're not alone, Alex. Yeah.
Yeah, no, like so many people are doing that. I think we'll obviously get into it in a moment.
Oh, yeah.
Here's a good one: carrying groceries with your drawing hand. I do that. I do that actually.
That's creative.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I picked it up from Casey Lee. You know, he had a chapter talked about
Yeah.
incorporating things in your things. So in the shower, you kind of holding your hand a certain way,
When you're
carrying
leaning
shopping
against a
bags.
pole, you're doing
Yeah,
this.
exactly. Yeah, no, I do that seriously. Shopping.
Yeah.
I now do shopping bags with a 3-finger grip. You know, that's how we train to get the right wrist alignment.
Exactly.
These days, more like some kind of like grip on the shopping bag, but that's good there.
So have we got any more coming in?
Let's
Or should we
see.
help them
We've
out?
got let's see, release trainers for compound.
So that's like a
release.
shot trainer or a form master
Shot
or something?
trainer. Yeah, looking
Yep.
at that. Rubber band. Cardio and strength training. The gym.
Bingo. Yep.
Nice. I definitely don't do that, so that's something you can think about too. I'll do too. What the hell is blind belt? That's a good one. It might do that. We'll talk about that too. Let's see. Visual training, vision training. Very nice. Okay. Doing
These are good
pull-ups.
things. So now we're getting into it. Yeah.
Now we get into it, right? I like it from like just shooting, and now I'm like, oh man, push-ups. Oh, you know, there's actually cry in your room or watching new Sensei. Yeah, I do that while watching like the Korean, so it's alright. We get that. All right, so we've got quite a
No,
few
you
things there.
get the point, right? So,
Yeah.
we've got shooting, obviously, but there's different types of shooting, right? There's shooting at blank bail or blank bud or blind bail or whatever you want to call it. There's, there's shooting at close range. There's shooting at targets. Then there's like timing drills. There's things like that. But that's all part of shooting, isn't it? And then you've got, whether it's scoring or not scoring or wind training or whatever, shooting in the rain. Shooting under pressure, shooting with distraction, shooting with noise and things like that. You got strength training, you got mobility training, you got recovery, physiology work, strengthening, mobility, motor control exercises. Then you got your mindset, your visualizing and stuff like that. And most people only focus on that one element, just the shooting. And only one element of the one element, which is just shooting targets and scoring.
Yep.
Right? So they're missing out on all of that array. Like these are the tools in your tool belt to build like a successful archer. Right? And it's like, imagine trying to build a house with just a hammer.
Yep.
You don't have a saw, you don't have nails, you don't have a screwdriver. Like your house is going to blow over in a strong wind.
I was going to say, like, speaking of holistic, because like, I really imagine that's what I tell people, right? When people say I'm struggling with like elbow light, I'm struggling with like getting a higher score, well, ask them, well, what's your sight picture? But what? Okay, what's your anchor point? I don't really think about it. So they're kind of like vague, undefined things. And when you unlock these elements and you focus on them, you actually see a massive spike. And then you run to your next barrier, but you unlock something else. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like most people, again, I think we go back to the shooting thing. It's like you don't just shoot and become better. I mean, there's a point where you can improve what you're currently doing.
That's right.
But you can't. You're using one tool. It's kind of like, okay, so if all you're focusing on is instinctive sight picture, which is a thing, but there's a reason why instinctive is the least consistent form, and like using sights and anchor points and other specific aiming methods will give you more consistent results. You might be happy with your one like Swiss Army knife with one like hammer, but you've got to expand that repertoire a lot more so you know what you're looking for and what to use at a particular moment when you need it most.
Exactly right. And like you said, if you just focus on one thing, you'll get to a ceiling and then you'll stop, right? And you get that plateau. And this is where people lose motivation.
Yes.
And they start to look for something else. What is it? And they go out and buy a new Doinker stabilizer. But, but then here's the most frustrating thing for archers, particularly if they do, if you see yourself progressing up through the ranks and getting to a top level, quite often as a coach, what I see is that people have gotten into the sport, they've done that, they got to a certain level, maybe even be quite a competitive level, but they can't bust through that no matter what they do. And it's not because there's a tiny little tweak they need to make. There's actually a fundamental problem in their technique structure that goes back all the way back to, say, their posture or something like that.
And
when you change
like,
that,
often they never learnt it. They've just gone straight to shooting. They shot really well. They haven't
not
learned
their fault.
the fundamentals. They haven't gone to basics yet. They've missed like so many people shoot really well up to a certain point, but they ask them what's your shoulder alignment? I don't know, shoulder alignment. So
exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or like then here's the problem, right? So you might get to that level, which might be a reasonable level, even at a state or national level, But then to get to that next level, okay, let's say you have to fix your posture, but there's consequences to that. There's side effects, because when you change your posture, your head position is different, your alignment's different, your hook's different, your hand position, anchor's different. And so now, not only do you have to fix your posture, you have to actually go back and retrain all of those fundamentals, right? And so if you have aspirations towards getting to that top level, that it's important to identify that early and then structure your progression in such a way that you kind of remove those barriers. You know what I mean? So there's no ceilings for you to bust through to go back and have to redo it and build up and redo it and build up. And I see this a lot with archers who, you said how there's like a beginner level and then there's an elite level and there's nothing in between. This is a bit of a problem with that, because people can, train really hard and get into that national squad or elite training program or whatever, and then they have to go back and start again.
Yeah.
And they drop off it because they have to go and rebuild themselves from scratch. So that's where I think that pathway is absolutely critical to like building a pool of competitive archers.
Yeah, that's really, and I think it really ties into holistic. Is like, you can go to a pretty high level with an incomplete education in archery. I think where education is quite important as a teacher myself, but archery education is meant to be holistic. You're meant to learn everything you can with archery, not just be really good at shooting. There's a lot more theory behind it. There's a lot more principles of not just like visual training, but physical training as well. And by missing out on things, I think many of us who've shot for quite a while will feel those limitations in some way.
Yes.
It's like, I've shot for a few years now, for 8-9 years now. I know I don't train that often. I know I don't do any physical training, so I can't really shoot high draw weights competitively consistently, because that's unrealistic. I need to include these elements in my training program if I want to achieve the results that I want to achieve. And like we said before too, like many people will go into archery, they will go to the first competition and shoot really, really well by sheer virtue of being talented. They can get the mental side right, but when it comes to pushing beyond that barrier, without that foundation, they can't get any further than that. I've definitely had that experience with many people working in the national teams or youth national teams. We worked with Casey Clee recently, and it's kind of unlocked a lot of things. But I should have been doing that. But obviously, until someone actually said your shoulder alignment sucks, and actually authority to say so, and so I'm like, oh, I get it now. I mean, for me, it was kind of like, holy crap, I really should have done this properly from the very beginning, if I had the chance to do so. I mean, the opportunity is one thing, but if people have the opportunity, listen to your coach, damn it, seriously. That's such a strong part of being holistic, is learning everything, not just shooting. And in the time that you have for archery, which might be for many people once a week, diversify. I think it might be a good thing to think about. Not just don't shoot around for a day, but maybe if that's all you want to do is be social. That's different. But for personal goal setting, progression, I think we need to have a pathway to meet the expectations that we have for ourselves. I think that's our big message coming out of I think
That's right, and you touched on it there, diversify your training. Use all the tools in your tool belt. What are those tools? And we just did an exercise a minute ago where we came up with a whole bunch of them. You'd probably come up with more if you get creative. But then the other thing is, okay, another mental exercise that's I think important for archers to do is, okay, what are the things that you've been putting off the most? Okay, because what we find is that the things you put off the most are quite often, if not always, the things that you most need to do.
All right. Here's a question in chat, right? For those of you in chat right now, what's the one thing you should be doing that you're putting off the most in archery? No, I'm not talking about your washing, I'm talking about just your archery training. All right. So what's one thing you're doing which you've been putting off the most, and it'll probably be your most biggest problem? For me, I'll tell you this: SPTs. I think most people are like, oh, SPTs. I should be doing it every day, but definitely, I know when I do it. This is the thing that. When you avoid it, you won't. SPTs, not surprising. I know that when I do SPTs for a prolonged period of time, my scores are 20% better. Yep. Conditioning, structure, 100%. Form, consistency. When I don't do it, I'm picking the ball for the first time every single time. I don't have the familiarity with it. But I think a lot of us here in the boat where what you're not doing is probably what you need to work on the most. That's interesting. That's a good point there.
So it's just a thought exercise to kind of challenge yourself. Is it mindset training? Is it visualization? Is it strength training? Is it whatever? Because we all have a bias towards what we're good at, don't we?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
your bias is, okay, I like running, so I'm going to be really fit, but maybe you don't do any strength training, so you get a shoulder injury. Um, so
Mm.
it's just be aware of your personal biases, and of all the tools in your tool belt, make sure you use all of them.
A big part is working your weaknesses. I mean, as a teacher,
Mm.
holistically for my students, when I teach them in schools, like I know what you're strong at, but work to your weaknesses. The funny thing is, you need to like even it out a bit more, right? You can work. I know you're good at doing this,
Yeah.
but if you avoid this for the next 5 years, you'll be in a really bad position when you start doing it for real. So it's very important to address, don't ignore weaknesses, address weaknesses. All right, so
Yes.
that's a really good point there. But a couple of questions up in chat for a moment here. So firstly, we've got Kitson. He says hi to you. He met you in
Hey,
Bangkok
Gibson. Oh,
after the
cool.
World Cup. So I'll see you again. And we've got a question from I think Mr. Alex down here. Injury. So have you had any archery injuries?
Good question. I've had injuries. Um, I, there's important to distinguish between what an injury is. So, when you're training, particularly at a competitive level, it's normal, it's very frequent to get like tightness or like little niggles and stuff like that.
Mm,
Not necessarily an injury, but these are things you really need to get on top of.
yep.
An injury is something, like a strain or a pulled muscle or, you
Yep.
know, something like that. And yes, I have had injuries. So, uh, when was it? 2016 or something. I had quite a bad. I tore my infraspinatus, which is
Oof.
part of the rotator cuff.
Mm-mm.
I didn't do it in archery, but it affected my
Yeah.
archery. Um, and that was a really big barrier for me because um, I didn't know how to rehabilitate it at that point in time. And so it was very frustrating because, okay, that hurts. I'll stop shooting for a bit. It feels all right now. I'll start shooting, and it came back again. It
Yep.
always reoccurred because the tear itself formed scar tissue in the belly of the muscle.
Mm.
And so, as you probably know, like that scar tissue doesn't have the full strength and mobility, and so it just sort of keeps tearing again. It's very, brittle tissue, and you sort of re-aggravate the injury. Work through so many physiotherapists and massage therapists and things like that, sort of making yo-yo progress.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then eventually I got put on to this amazing physical therapist who does a combination of what's called ART or active release technique, dry needling, which breaks up the scar tissue very effectively. And
Mm.
something that I had dozens of sessions with, very experienced shoulder specialists on, was basically fixed in like 2 weeks.
Wow.
Um, and one of the things that, you know, she should pay me a commission because now I recommend so many people to go see her. She's just amazing. But one of the things that I learned through that whole process was about the rehabilitation, but also she educated me in terms of the prehab, how to
Mm.
prevent those injuries.
Mm.
And we've, developed a bit of a relationship now with, all the archery work we do together. And she's actually come out to archery and, observed our mobility and motor control issues and looked at 6 different archers and figured out what all our physiological problems are and where we're
I can
tight and where
imagine
we're
like
weak.
the whole like red flags going. What the hell are you doing? You're gonna like.
But this process was illuminating, and now what was very frequent for me was that I used to, when I was training really, really hard, was I used to have neck problems and tight shoulders, of course,
Mm, yeah.
which a lot of archers are familiar with, and also the most common shoulder injury is probably a tightness through the drawing side shoulder through the front here,
Hmm.
right? And she educated me on how to, through strength training, prevent that. Um, and now, uh, no tightness, like no injuries, nothing, because I've incorporated that into my strength regime.
I suppose
And
it's on the
so,
topic. We have a question from Eliza way back, but talk about. I
yeah,
think she had talked about alignment and drawing. I think you mentioned like how to address that through strength training. Like, be more specific. Like, how do you, draw and like have the least amount of strain on the shoulder?
strain on the shoulder. How do I draw without putting strain on the shoulder? I mean, it's all about the mobility of the scapula.
Mm-hmm.
If you draw by, in the draw sequence, first thing to do is to obviously align the shoulders so you achieve your shoulder alignment. And then through the mobility of the scapula, you're basically drawing from the elbow to achieve that full alignment position. And that takes the strain off the shoulder girdle itself because you're isolating the engagement in the scapular retractors. The biggest barrier for that, for most people, is motor control or scapular control because they don't have the correct neural pathways to engage the scapula through that full range. And also some people have quite tight shoulder girdle, and so they don't have the mobility to even put that shoulder in the right position.
I was
And that's
gonna
where they
say,
feel a
like,
lot of
one of the
strain.
things we see in common try is we see people who can't do that. I'm thinking, you're
Yep.
looking at IT, right? It's like, yeah, they're sitting
Yep.
all the time at a desk, literally hunched over, typing, and you try to move their back.
Yeah.
They actually can't expand any more than that. They're like literal, like, like the
Yep.
primates going like this. It's actually, you can tell who hasn't actually done any training or have that mobility thing, which is a good point to make.
That's right. And I think that as a rule, I mean, people that I see generally don't have that. So I think it's important to first identify, and the first session with me is always we screen mobility, motor control, and strength, right? Because if you don't have the mobility, motor control, or strength to be able to do the technique, well, there's no point us trying to do it. It's like if you rock up for your gymnastics lesson and they say do a backflip, well, if you don't have the flexibility or the
Yeah,
strength to
do the
do one, you're just
splits,
going to land on your head. Yeah. So screening that's very, very important as the first thing. Yeah.
That's a good point. I hope that helps, Eliza, by the way. That was something you asked
Does that answer the
before.
question? If it doesn't, yeah.
I kind of jumped it like about half an hour ago, but that was kind of there in the background. I remember these
Yeah.
things, guys. There were a couple of things too. I think we missed out. There were injuries. There are a couple of questions. One was, this is something we also talk about, age. All right, is there a soft age limit to get into archery?
Okay, general and specific answers. So, it's an interesting question because, some people might say the younger the better. There's some great studies that I'm happy to share with you and your audience if you like on adolescents specializing in sports. And what they find is that for the most rounded athletic development, the best thing to do is up until about the age of 12 or 13, is to be a generalist and to do many, many different types of sports.
I think many
Play
people like
soccer,
that
play
too.
cricket,
Yeah.
play softball, play, gymnastics, try all the different sorts of things. And then from the age of 12, then you can start to specialize. And that's important because before the age of 12, that's when you're developing all the motor patterns and the different, so if you just started shooting at age 6 and did nothing else, like you wouldn't be able to walk straight, and there'll be other problems that
Yeah.
and so I think and it also doesn't matter because if you're a 44-year-old accountant and I tell you, well, the best age to start archery is 12, well, what are you gonna do about that? so
Yeah.
so that's an answer, but I don't know what you're gonna do about
I think
it.
largely, look, I think physically, optimally, if you were like breeding the perfect archery child, then you probably do that as pathway. But most people, archery doesn't really have anything specific which requires you to be trained from birth. If you're doing English warbow, that's different, sure. But even nowadays, people can develop the strength and structure to do so. If think about being an elite Olympic athlete, it's not so much the physical thing, but more of the other things in life which slow you down.
Yeah.
I think that's largely what I've said mostly is, look, you could start like my age, 23 when I started, and you could catapult within 4 years to top the nation with the right training routine, the right
not
training
unheard of,
mindset.
yeah.
The main thing is at 23, I've got a full-time job already, right? I'm not gonna divert so much time away from that. Whereas when you're younger, I guess you can say you have fewer things on your plate. You're mostly focused on your studies at school, the university, you got more support in your network, and it's less burden. Perhaps more financial support from training programs, perhaps, or from sponsorships. So there's more time to play around with. When you're older, job, family, these things to take more priority. So that's why you see fewer people who are older get into top level archery. Now, if once you're in there, you can stick around for like in your 30s, 40s. Some people are, like I'd say right now, like a lot of Korean archers competing. They're still in the national teams. They're still vying for national spots, and they're like 40 plus. So you still be top tier well into your 40s because physically.
Look at someone like Michele Frangilli, from Italy. That guy's an absolute legend. He's been around forever, and
yeah. American side, you've got Katina Lorig. She's been competing since forever.
She's awesome,
she's still in the game. She's still active in training. Kitson's 58. There we go. Still, I guess Kitson still shoots competition. So, it's all about how far you want to push yourself more than anything else. Thankfully, archery's one of those sports where you don't need to be in the prime of your health and your fitness. But it depends what your goals are. If you want to be competing at top level, you have to maintain things. It might be hard as you get older for different reasons, physical and other. But there's no real like bottom end where like you can't get into archery if you're above 12, you're above 18. You see a lot of people have that dream run where they did start young, but believe me, there are just as many people shooting maybe not top level, but top level who started late, who started quite late. Depends on what you mean to put in. That's a really good question too, and that's a good answer. Hopefully,
Yeah, it is a really good answer. You pretty much covered it. And the other thing there is, as an athlete or as a competitor, it's dangerous to sometimes have expectations of what's ideal. Like, and this was a humbling experience for me when, you train and you have what you think looks like good form, and you go overseas and you get trounced by a 44-year-old balding guy who, anchors in some
pushes
weird
forward
way.
in front or something.
So it's like you just got to remove those expectations and, again, bring it back to yourself.
And another question too. This is from, I think it was Tiny who asked this question. I think it was, and it's a good question. It's about weight. So I imagine it's talking about physical weight, so your body weight. That does
Okay.
body
Yep.
weight play a factor into your performance? And I think the question was, does it like affect how you're selected for, let's say, national teams?
Oh, yeah, that's a controversial question. I don't know if I can answer that question. I'm not on any panels selecting any national teams, but there's certainly been some controversy around that in the past.
Hmm.
Um, Happy to share my opinion, which is that I think archery is a beautiful sport in the aspect that you can make it totally objective. There's a score. If you're the best archer, you should go. And you can come up with whatever. You can carve up the selection process for for teams however you like, but it can be objective. As soon
Yeah.
as you start, putting in, subjective criteria like body weight, or if you have a nose ring, you can't join the team or whatever.
Hmm.
Like, that gets into sort of some gray areas.
Yeah.
I'm all, that being said, I am an advocate for, I think, general health and fitness. I think that it's important to, I think and I try and promote people to be, have an athletic mindset and an athletic build and be in top physical condition, because that's an edge that you can have on your competitors who aren't necessarily. There are examples of people who shoot amazingly well on the international circuit who aren't, don't look like they're from Baywatch. But, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but I
Yeah,
think,
I'd say that question's from Killer Cat, by the way. That's the wrong person, but yeah, that's a good question too. But I think on my side is, look, I think, like you had the image of a lot of the top tier archers who are quite athletic, quite slim,
yes, yeah,
toned. They got a pretty slim build, so it's not like it's archery isn't a sport which makes you toned for the most part.
yep,
But most
that's right.
people who are athletic, the studies show that most people have a certain kind of build which does really well. Doesn't mean you can't do well. I mean, again, you see like Mikel from Frank Gilly, he was actually he's quite buff these days. You have a lot of people shooting top, especially compound. Compound tends to be a bit more rounded in a physical way, but definitely top tier shooters. I'm thinking right away like Pat Collum. He's top tier still for the last like 20 years or something, and he's not exactly like the slimmest guy. In fact, most of the compound shooters are probably not on the slim side of the stereotype. Whereas I think the recurve tends to be more the slim side for some whatever reason. Maybe there's more like anchor with the body weight. Who knows? But like it's not
I
as
think,
important. Yeah, I think what you said before is like if you perform, then you're gonna be chosen. Your results will matter more. You might not look
yeah,
the fittest, but if you're a consistent performer, then you can't really argue that. The other thing too, I think you mentioned the advantage is that if you're more athletic, you're probably gonna have a more robust training routine. You might shoot really well one day, but if you have the athletic edge, you could probably like have a more regular practice routine, probably recover quicker, you could grow faster. So perhaps there's some edges there too, which having a general good athletic lifestyle brings, rather than specifically body weight.
yeah, and that's right. So I think, um, there are examples. To bring up one classic one, there's a guy called Jackson Fear back before my day in Australia, who's a pretty well-known archer, and he was a contender for the the Sydney 2000 Olympics, I think, spot. And he was back in the 90s was shooting 340s at 70 meters. And you compare him to someone like Simon Fairweather, who's the Olympic gold medalist, of course, who's a super fit bloke, super lean. So there is that dichotomy there, but again, at the end of the day, I think it's important to promote that health and fitness in general, but I don't know if it has a place in selection criteria.
Yeah, I doubt it too. I think ultimately scores matter more. We can't say for certain, we're not the authorities on selection, but ultimately scores, performance matters more. Now, exactly how score and performance is weighed up, that's a bit different, a bit controversial there. But ultimately, if you are overweight but you shoot really, really well, then like that speaks for itself. It's supposed to anyway, but again, all things are slightly subjective, but scores trump all. So if you can shoot better than somebody else who's skinny, then you're in, for the most part. Is there anything else you want to talk about training before we move on to our next part?
The only other thing that we sort of haven't touched on is, and this is probably something that my approach is a little bit unique from other people, is the role of neurology in training and in skill acquisition. Because I think that's really important for people to understand. We talk about skill acquisition and we talk about developing pathways and making sure they're structured and something like that. But you need to understand how the body learns a skill. Are you with me?
Yep, I'm with you.
So that's probably the only other thing I wanted to talk about, which is
yeah. So was it more specific, or was that just a general thing you want to say?
Well, I guess sort of to explain it, I guess the premise of it is, like, what is a skill, I guess? And a skill is, in its simplest form, is a neural pathway, right? And neural signaling controls everything in your body, from, your heartbeat to your breathing to, muscle contractions and things like that. And when we talk about a specific skill, that's just a reinforced neural pathway, which is, electrical signals from the brain traveling throughout your nervous system to create some sort of response, right?
Yep.
And when you talk about a complex skill like archery, that is a whole series of reinforced neural pathways, okay? Like, it's not just one neural pathway for one shot. There's actually all the skills are broken down into those unique neural pathways, which are all interacting together and things like that. And whether or not you know it, when you're training, you're reinforcing a neural pathway. It's just, if you're training correctly, you'll be developing a bad habit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this is where I think an understanding, or basic understanding, of neurology is very important from a coaching perspective, because it kind of provides a framework to bypass barriers to skill acquisition and then accelerate that learning curve, if that makes sense.
That makes absolute sense. The neurology is the fundamental for all development, brain development, learning, learning, teaching as well. It's about producing pathways.
Yes,
You're firing off all your neural pathways. One analogy I use, I tell my students all the time, because growth mindset kind of builds on, it's a philosophy, but it's also based on neurology. You actually have to build the pathways for you to cope with better things later on. And I use the example, look, when I was teaching, I wanted to reset the kind of like the progression to understand the learning mindset. So I started to learn to write left-handed. I'm right-handed, so I started writing left-handed. And that is literally building new pathways. Because
that is a great example.
Seriously, like, one thing I did was brush my teeth left-handed. It's like, what the? Like, seriously, like, because you never do these things. You never do it, right? Because you always hold right hand, right? So when you first, like, how do I actually hold the toothbrush to begin with? Like, you just have no concept of how to do so. You can do your right hand blind with one arm tied behind your back, right? When you sleep.
Yeah, exactly.
But you have that. It's like, we talk about neural paths, it's like highways, right, or roads.
Yeah.
When you have no road from A to B, you can't get there. So having no pathway that goes, how do I hold a brush in my left hand? You have to actually do it for the first time. You're gonna break that path and start building. You are literally building new neuron pathways as you're learning new skills. So learning how to brush my teeth was weird as. I still can't do it properly, but you're learning like you're a 5-year-old again, which is why I reset this thing. Holding a pen and writing is a very complex skill. All right,
Yes.
that's really really hard. Using chopsticks in my left hand, I can do it now. The like dual chopsticks with both hands. But that was weird as, and it's weird because you've never done it before.
And I think that's the best example I can think of, brushing your teeth or, trying to, you ever tried to throw a tennis ball left-handed?
Oh, yeah, plenty of times. But yeah,
Like,
it's also
it's
weird.
pretty
It's kind of
embarrassing.
like, huh.
Yeah. Whereas your right hand just feels natural, right?
Yeah,
Or if you're right-handed, I
absolutely.
suppose. But you need to extrapolate that to training. It doesn't matter whether it's learning how to drive a car or learning how to ride a bike or learning how to shoot a bow. It's these are complex skills with many individual elements. And I like to use the example of like if you're learning how to drive a car for the first time,
Mm.
okay? What do you do? So you probably go to an empty car park somewhere where you don't have to worry about pedestrians or traffic or bumping into your neighbor's Bentley,
Mm.
and you can just focus on, all right, how do I hold the steering wheel? That's the first thing. Then where's
Yeah.
my indicator? Where's my wipers? How do I adjust my mirrors? Am I strapped in? All right, then you learn the clutch and the accelerator and the revs and the gears. And you
Yeah.
learn each thing in isolation, right? And then you slowly add degrees of complexity to that skill. And if you rocked up on your first driving lesson and your driving instructor said, okay, David, today we're going to teach you how to reverse parallel park an articulated trailer in traffic. you know like there's too much complexity, and
Yeah.
there's too much, like you're setting yourself up for failure.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so you need to break the skill down into its constituent parts and then layer them on one step at a time. And this works equally as well for when you're teaching a new archer or when you're doing corrective interventions for experienced archers, right? And like let's say someone has some sort of technique problem or target panic or whatever, you need to peel back the layers of
Mm.
complexity, okay, until you get to that fundamental, and then one at a time master that, and then layer on the next layer of complexity, and then keep going
Which
until
is
you
why we say
master it.
blind ball shooting. Literally, look, haven't traveled outside. Come in the shed, blank target, 2 meters. Close your eyes. Just focus on one thing. And that's part of that layering is. Look, there's no point
That's right. That's right.
fixing your problem at 70 meters in like Gulf Force winds. There's no point in doing that. May as well come back down and say, look, let's just focus on the skill you need to fix first. That's a really good example of layering it back there. And this comes back
Eh,
down to, all these different training routines. Don't go and shoot. If you need to fix a problem and you're just trying to score at 70 meters, that's gonna play with you. That's gonna be probably the worst thing you can do. Is if you need to fix something, is do a
it's not going
score
to
around
happen.
70 meters. It's not gonna happen.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think a lot of coaches struggle with is understanding those progressions. So like blank butt is a great example, right? Like if you're shooting 70 meters in the wind in competition, you're not going to fix your release or whatever.
Hmm.
And if you bring it back to blank butt, some coaches will do that, but then it's like, oh, I'm still not getting it. Now
Yeah.
what? Right? So
Yeah.
so you then need to again peel back more layers. Don't be afraid of bringing it back. Like take the bow out of their hands. Give them a pipe bow or a training bow, like I started on.
Yeah.
And then doing it in front of a mirror. There's no arrow. There's no target. There's no bow. You're just focusing on internally what is the skill that I need to get right. Because if you can't do it with a PVC pipe bow at 6 pounds, you're not going to be able to do it at 70 meters in the wind in competition.
Absolutely.
And so master it at that most basic level first, and then add one layer of complexity, a tiny little step. And if you pile it on all at once, it's like reversing that trailer.
Yeah,
It's not going to
absolutely.
happen.
And as a learner, and one of the biggest hindrances to any learner is ego.
Mm,
Right, like you feel like, oh yeah, I can shoot 70 meters. I can shoot normally. I don't need to go to do a pipe bow with 6 pounds. It's like no. Listen, to me,
yeah.
coach. All right, like, one of the toughest things is like people don't want to let go of the fact that they want to shoot. If they want to shoot, you're not going to stop them. But if you want to, get coached, you need to follow a certain pattern, because we know this works. We don't just say, all right, same with boxing, right? I'm gonna fix this technique of blocking. We'll get in the ring and we'll practice. So you gotta learn it first. You gotta learn the
Yes.
correct structures and take it back. So don't put yourself in a high stress situation. Because in archery, shooting on a round is a high stress situation. That is
Yeah.
match condition, and you don't learn skills and drills in match conditions. You learn to prepare for match conditions, and then you refine it under match conditions. But you don't do it right away. You've got to
And
learn. Yeah.
you're exactly right. Like you hit the nail on the head there. And that example, um, yeah, it's just perfect. I forgot what I was gonna say, but yeah, like if you pile on the complexity all at once, you're asking for failure. And I think that mindset differentiates successful people from unsuccessful people. You know, the successful archers, or this applies to any field in your career or whatever, but successful people are like, all right, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get to that goal. Whereas other people get fixated on, I want to shoot a 50-pound bow.
Yep.
And I want to shoot 70 meters. So that's what they drive towards, is shooting a 50-pound bow. But when you get there, it's not a competition about who can pull the heaviest bow, is
No,
it?
absolutely not.
Yeah. So
Yeah, ego is a big thing there too. So I think that's
That's
a
right.
big point there. Like as a learner, as a coach, there are things to watch out for. But as a learner, there are certain things you can do for yourself, which
That's
will open up your mind and more methods to build you up. The other thing too, this is a bit of a sidetrack here, but also in the same way, like as a coach, something which I should talk about one day is like when you demonstrate things, use their bows, not your bow. And especially if shooting like when you're training beginners, you're shooting like bare bow, the basic trad bows. One of the things I've seen people do is they'll use their Olympic bow to demonstrate technique. And to us, it's natural. It's what we're most familiar with.
Yeah.
But for someone watching, complexity. You see, what's that long thing sticking out? What's that sight with there? What's this bright metal thing there?
What's a stabilizer? Yeah.
They can't process what you were doing, even though it's actually the same technique. Using a complex bow actually makes it harder. So it's good practice as a coach to like pick up their bow or their basic bow, whatever bow they're using, and demonstrate on their bow.
That's right.
You can feel what they're feeling too. I'll share a story too. There was one time literally where there's a guy who had been training for a few months. He looked okay, and one day he just shot like crap. Like we were shooting in our 15-meter like outdoor shed, and he nearly shot over the shed. Like, how? Like you went from grouping like this much at 30 meters to shooting over a shed at 15. And I couldn't figure out why. I was watching him. I'm demonstrating on my bow, which is another trad bow. I couldn't figure it out. I got his bow. I shot fine. Nothing wrong with the knock point. Nothing wrong with the bow. I went, give me a tab. Because he said, I've got a new tab. And I went, when did you get a new tab? How? Why didn't you tell me this? I'm a coach. I'm your coach. Why didn't you tell me, right? I got the tab. I knew what happened there, right? His tab wasn't trimmed. So literally his tab was cutting to my cheek. I couldn't anchor. I could see why he was struggling. That this big ledge or this ledge or this big bit of leather was cutting into my jaws. I was naturally kind of edging away because it felt really uncomfortable. But what was he doing?
So it just threw off his whole pattern.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like when we swapped his old tab, which wasn't his, but I got a new one. He borrowed a tab for a while. Perfect anchor, shot fine. Got the new tab. I never saw that until we used his equipment. So it might not be a perfect match for you, but a coaching mentality, you got to visualize what your learner's going through, and that means using their bow, their equipment, and trying to make it work on their side. Because if you can do it on their bow, they can do it on their bow. But your bow might not be the best thing because it's different bow, different grip, different sight, different feel. So, it's all about like visualize. The coach is kind of visualize what you're visualizing, but it's kind of like, we're trying to imagine you driving a car, but we're not driving ourselves. So sometimes you have to kind of be behind the wheel first and know how your own car works or their car works. So that way you know what they're doing wrong.
So you're putting yourself in the mindset of that archer to solve that problem. And that affects your communication style too, right?
Absolutely.
The way you explain it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, it might make sense to you, but the archer is just you're on the wrong wavelength.
Absolutely.
So they just don't get it.
It's like imagine doing tech support with no screen. Like I'm trying to imagine walking through what you're doing here, because the hardest thing with archery is that it's so individual. We can't see what you were seeing. It's not like boxing or tennis where we can see your technique and we go, your arm's wrong, your elbow's wrong. There are some things we can see, but ultimately your final shot is like, I can't see your string picture. I can't feel what you're feeling in your final expansion. I can only walk through the process and I can only go, you felt that, right? Because I know you've gone through all the structure. I felt that connection, I felt that snap. I went, good, that's a good shot process. But we can only walk you through the process. We can't actually see what you're seeing. A good coach, I think we mentioned this too, a good coach has the ability to visualize and get insight on their learners. I think a bad coach is going to be like kind of like armchair, sit back, just do these things, things and shoot well. Whereas a good coach will go, let me walk through and see what you're seeing. And then once you can perfectly capture that learning process, this is why I say process a lot. Once you know what they're seeing, then we go, okay, I think I know what you're feeling. And that extra step, that extra connection really highlights why you need a good coach.
I totally agree with you. That's a differentiator between a good coach and an average coach, because And hey, like this is something that I've learned over the years as well,
Mm.
because I'm a better coach today than I was a year ago or a year
Okay.
before that.
Mm.
And when you first start teaching someone, and I don't know any way around this for developing coaches, but when you first start teaching someone, you're naturally going to be biased to the way that you would learn and
Mm.
the way that works for you. But as you work with more and more archers, you see that, well, maybe not, that's not necessarily the best way for that archer. Or
Mm.
maybe there need to be explained a different way. Maybe it's the same concept but explained in different terminology, or demonstrated in three different ways. Or maybe they're a kinesthetic learner, or an audible learner, or whatever it is. But
Mm.
they take these concepts in different ways. But after you've worked through that with one archer, then two archers, then five archers, and 6 dozen archers, eventually you kind of get the different patterns where people deviate from that correct
Mm.
path, and you can kind of learn the shortcuts to then like inject yourself where it's most effective.
Mm. Yeah.
That's putting yourself in that archer's shoes about, okay, that's the problem they're having, here's the 6 different ways we can attack that problem.
Yeah. Absolutely, and believe me, like when you do online coaching, live streams,
It's hard,
this
yeah.
it's like not only do I not know you, I'm
Yeah.
trying to visualize what you've recorded last week and thinking, all right, you're going through this process and you're seeing this. All I'm seeing is just like one back view from a fuzzy like in a mobile phone camera. That's actually it's really challenging. Okay, that's why I said look, as somebody who isn't your particular coach, as much as you call me a coach, I can only give advice perspective. I can't necessarily get into your mind. All right, I try to, but it's pretty hard. It's coaching isn't that the thing where anyone go, oh yeah, you're doing this wrong. I think a lot of us can be armchair coaches. We watch someone
Mm.
shoot and go, your elbows too high or your shoulders aren't aligned, but you don't know why they're
Ah,
doing that. All right, they're kind of
and
very
that,
easily judgmental.
you just hit, oh man, you nailed it. Like, and it's not about like, you're not doing this, do this, right? That's
Yeah.
not coaching.
Yep.
That's just like
Yeah,
frustrating the
it's like
archer. Okay.
change for the sake of change. It's like
It's
some people say
it's
like change your anchor, but why? Like you don't know why they're doing it in the first place. Like they just change because I said so. And you said before, like it's not bias, right? People see I see it on Reddit all the time. Someone posts a form check video, and someone who probably hasn't even shot that though. They probably shot like trad, and they said, "Oh, it should be anchoring a little higher." It's like,
and it's
no,
not only
really?
it's not only what to do, but it's how to do it that's lost in that process. And that how is critical. It's like, okay, you need to get good alignment. Well,
Mm,
yeah, okay, I understand that academically, but how do I do that, right? And that's why, like, that was one of the main reasons. I don't know if you saw on my YouTube channel, I started doing a series of coaching case studies.
mm, mm,
That's why I started doing that, because I wanted to kind of demonstrate to some people, like, not just the what and what not to do, but the how, like how to train it, how do you implement it, and it's
mm.
like how do you get hands on, and how do you actually, um, like correct these like minute little changes that people need to do.
Yeah. All right. I reckon we'll wrap it up in, say, 20 minutes or 10, 15 minutes because it's going quite
Mhm.
a while now.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we'll take our questions from chat. So if you have any specific questions for Jarryd, particularly about coaching or technique, we'll talk about mostly coaching so far. But if you have any specific questions that we can hopefully answer, I know we've been skipping a few things, but if you have any questions now, this is the chance to throw questions our way. But while we're gathering a few questions, I think what my big question is, like, let's say I represent the average archer, which in many cases I do. I'm the people's archer. I kind of like shoot sometimes, coach sometimes, get average scores. Don't train that frequently, maybe once a week, twice if I'm really motivated. So I'm kind of like that homebody who wants to do a little better, but doesn't really take the first step. So if I'm the average person who has been shooting for a while and doesn't feel like we can really break through those ceilings or those personal barriers,
Mm.
what would some advice you would give to someone like me?
Excellent question. I mean, the first thing I would say to that is that there's no such thing as an average archer, because every archer is different.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And I mean, the average Australian is a 23-year-old female or something. But that doesn't mean that I can treat everyone like they're a 23-year-old female.
Yeah, that doesn't really
You know
apply
what I
to
mean?
me there.
Yeah. So sorry, mate. Yeah. So it's like, okay, well, so that's the first thing to acknowledge. But so there's not one cookie cutter approach that I could say that would work for every average archer. Okay. So wouldn't it be nice if there was? But
Yeah.
unfortunately, there's not. But okay. So that's a politician's answer. But what do you do about that? So, um, let me tell you the process that I would maybe go through in terms of helping that person.
Yep.
And the first thing I would try and do is understand that individual's goals, right?
Mm.
Because that's the motivating factor. So, if you're an average archer, and if you want to be Olympic champion one day, well, hey, there's a pathway that we need to go through to get from here to there.
Mm.
Or if you just want to shoot socially, that's a totally different thing. And so it's understanding those motivations and what's driving that person.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
And then developing like a pathway from here to there. Because when I first started coaching, again, this is a perspective thing. I sort of tried to make people follow the pathway that I followed personally. And it took me quite a while to realize that, no, that's not right, because I can't project myself onto you, and I need to understand what's your goals, drivers, motivations, and things like that. Once you have that clear picture, it's about breaking those goals down into like a step by step, like I call it like derivative goals. So you have like a motivator, which is like your big picture goal. That's like your ultimate thing you want to achieve. And then you break it down. So I don't know, someone might say, all right, I want to be an Olympic champion. It's like, okay, great. Let's say, stamp that you want to be 2024 Olympic champion. So, okay, then you break that down. All right, so then you need to get selected for the national team by this date. So to get selected, then you're, 2 years before that, you're going to need to be placing in the top 16 in World Cup events, there. Yeah. Okay, then that's breaking it down. Then, okay, to get to that level, you need to be shooting this level of score. Okay. And then, all right, to shoot that score, then we need to break it down into, this is where my conditioning and fitness and that needs to be. And then you compare that to where you are now, and you can start to then break it down into smaller and smaller steps until you break it down to, all right, what's the one next thing I need to focus on that's going to get me towards my goal?
Yep.
Right? So there's no one cookie cutter approach to that.
Yep.
And yeah, so that one next thing might be like, okay, well, let's say you're an archer and you're competing with that ultimate goal. Let's use that one example, that you want to be the ultimate world's best archer. Well, if you're, say, shooting at a state or national level now, you might have lined up to shoot this full competition season, and you might have lined up to shoot, okay, I'm going to shoot the state titles and the national match play series, and I'm going to shoot, the indoor nationals and whatever, right? But is that really on that pathway towards that ultimate goal? Maybe you need to withdraw from some of those and just spend the next 6 months in front of a mirror with a rubber band, because that, in the big scheme of things, in that 4 or 5 year plan to get towards your goal, that is what's going to get you there. And then you can break that down into minute technique goals. Okay, like this week, this is my focus. I'm focusing on pre-draw and making sure that my shoulder alignment, my posture is absolutely perfect. That's how I would break it down.
So basically, the message is like there is no one approach, but the big thing is break things down, right? So rather than have the goal of I want to be a national shooter, break down what you need to get there before you have that goal. So the goal is there, but break down the steps, break down what you need to achieve the steps, go down further and further until you have an actionable plan, basically, right?
And then just get laser focused on that one next thing. Just the next one thing, because that's the only thing you can do right now, right?
Absolutely.
So there you go. And then as you go forward, then you need to reassess that process and keep it progressing.
I believe this is why you need coaches and trainers, right? If it was that easy to set goals and break things down, then you wouldn't pay personal trainers to fix your life up. So this is definitely a thing which people do as a living, and for a reason too. So that's very specific and precise advice there. So we've got a few quick questions from chat. I've got a handful. So this one's from... I'm lost already. So Mr. Alex, can archery give you a good physique? And will it be non-symmetrical or asymmetrical?
Great question. Can archery give you a good physique? So can it or will it? There's two different questions there. Can it? Yes. Will it? Not necessarily. So, if you take your archery training seriously as an athlete and you use all those tools in your tool belt, and you're doing your strength and fitness training and conditioning training and all of that, you're going to be in good shape, right? But if you just rock up, shoot twice a week on, 30 hours or whatever, that's not going to make you Arnold Schwarzenegger. So, so that's that. What was the second part to that question?
Will be asymmetric.
Okay, yeah, that's really important to touch on. And I sometimes get asked by people, how do I balance out? Because that what's that classic example of the 16th century, the Mary Rose,
Yeah, yeah, the
where that
shoulders
that ship
are,
sunk
yeah,
and
yeah,
they dug up all the skeletons centuries later and found that they could identify the archers on board because they had scoliosis like this,
yeah, yeah.
right? Curvature of the spine from all the asymmetrical shooting that they did. And so it's important for archery. It is an asymmetrical sport.
Mm,
And more than asymmetrical, it's asymmetrical in like two different planes
yeah,
because it's asymmetrical in this plane and it's asymmetrical let me turn this way, in this plane, right, from front to back.
yeah, yeah.
And so you need to balance it out. And also, archery doesn't work the full range of motion through the shoulder girdle or the scapula or anything like that. So if you just shoot, and if you just do SBT and no strength training to balance it out, you're going to get injuries.
Yeah.
So balancing it out means not shooting left-handed. That would be like David's example of, all right, I'm learning to write left-handed, so I should learn to right-handed, so I should learn left. But that doesn't it doesn't balance it out. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
perfect. You're just going to probably injure yourself. But strength training is the vehicle to balance yourself out. And strength training, the biggest mistake I see with archers who do strength training is they go too specific. So they try and replicate, they get cables and they start pulling it like it's an archery bow or something, and they try and do something too specific. First goal of strength training for archery is non-specific. It's promoting balanced muscle development, okay, and working through a full range of motion. So, archery is all through this plane. It's a really short range of motion. We don't do any overhead work or things like this, and so the most common shoulder injuries are caused by tightness in the subscap or subscapularis, which is part of the rotator cuff. So when that gets tight, it applies pressure to the shoulder girdle, and that's when you get the pinching or the impingement of the long head of biceps, which comes up through the clavicular head here. So, that overhead work is really important in particular. And if I could only do, say, one strength session a week, what I would be doing is a superset of overhead press and chin-ups.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, like, the idea is, like, you don't have to go to the extreme and counterbalance everything just to offset that. Look, if you do a general workout or strength training, your muscles will normalize. You're not going to have a suddenly big muscle from the extra training because that's not how muscles work. If you're doing general training, you'll catch up, you normalize to a certain extent, the other side, but you won't have one side which is like one super strong arm and one side's going to be one super thin arm. That's not how it works for the most part. So I think what you're saying is like having a general training plan is going to help balance things out rather than anything too specific. Yeah, great.
Yeah, I answered the question.
Good, great. That's a great question, Mr. Alex, by the way. Good. We got a question from Akil from Kenya before. This is what he asked earlier. So let's talk about what shooting method or process should someone follow, and what are your thoughts on the KSL method?
Okay, really good question, really important. Actually, this is going to be my topic on my next YouTube video. I've just been working on this at the moment.
Good plug there, right there. Check it out, right?
So there's a perception in archery that there's a superior technique somewhere out there, right? And what is the most superior technique? And you might ask yourself this question about, okay, well, how deep should the bottom finger hook the string, and how much should I rotate my front arm, and should I draw the bow with a linear draw or a more angular draw? Of course, there's no such thing as a fully linear draw. So really what you're asking yourself is, should I draw the bow in an angular draw or a more angular draw? I think these are the wrong questions.
Yeah.
Because we can look at top archers performing exceptionally well on the international circuit that violate every single one of these rules.
Frank Gilly.
Frank Gilly, yeah. What a legend. And he's a perfect example, right? Because he draws the bow and he like bends his front arm, he moves his head, and he sort of does this sort of thing. But the guy's an Olympic gold medalist. He set an indoor world record that stood for close to 20 years. And what a legend. So what interests me is not what all top archers do differently, but the right question is, what do all top archers do the same? Right? So go watch some top archers shooting, international events, and look at it through that lens. Don't look at it like, okay, this person's got a bottom finger here in the first groove, this person's, it's hanging off the string, which one's better? It's like, no, well, okay, start looking at what they do the same. That will change your perspective on a few things. You'll start to notice, okay, maybe someone shoots with an open stance and a square stance. So, Ojin Hyek, Olympic gold medalist, shoots with an open stance. Kim Woo-jin shoots with a square stance. Brady shoots with an open stance. I mean, how can you navigate all these contradictions?
Mm-hmm.
And this is confusing for archers and coaches because everyone's looking for a cookie cutter approach.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. So, yeah, that's my advice to you.
Yeah, and it's
I don't
important
know
to
if that
find out.
answers your
Yeah,
question, but
yeah. The important point is like even with like there's no one method. So if you have like KSL, I mean, I had the
mm,
benefit of learning with Kasich Lee, and it's like
mm,
he said, look, even within his own system, there are differences. Like people,
that's
it's
right.
not one specific method which everyone
Yeah.
has to do. It's a framework. It's a mindset. It's like software. But people will apply it differently based on their own biomechanics, their own circumstances. So I think that a myth when people shoot down a different technique as being bad or inferior, they kind of like you have one particular person's style in mind, but it doesn't necessarily represent what you can do with it. So people say, "Oh, linear is inferior because it's all about doing this and drawing straight and doing it right away." Well, not everyone does that. And you look
I
at all the
think that's an
Korean art,
amateur,
yeah,
yeah, that's an amateur way of looking at it.
yeah,
Like I think amateurs will try and pick things apart.
hmm,
But there's things you can learn from all these approaches. And what I've found is like, okay, so Keezy Lee, for example, his work has been like incredibly influential to me, particularly in my early days, because
hmm,
he was a national coach in Australia when I started
yeah,
archery. Um, and he like obviously he's an incredible coach. Now I'm not qualified and I don't teach the KSL shot cycle. I have my own process that I teach, but the fundamentals that I teach are the same fundamentals that are in that system
hmm,
and the Korean system. And I've gone and trained with Coach Kim in Korea.
hmm,
That was an awesome experience.
hmm,
And so there's fundamentals that you cannot violate and be successful.
yeah,
They're the things that you should be focusing on, and the nuance, the variation, that comes down to the individual.
yes.
And that's why you need a coach to guide you through what is the right thing for you, right?
Yep.
So
As I say this too, as people, I get people who've read the books from Coach Kim and from
mhm.
Coach Lee, and having read, I started by reading Coach Lee's book first, and I probably had a rudimentary understanding. I knew some of the physical processes, but didn't understand the framework it was in because I didn't have the holistic education, like I said earlier. So it was only when I had the seminar from Coach Lee that I go, oh,
Mm,
I kind of get what we're saying. I see why he invited me. Yeah, I get it now. So kind of made sense. So it's easy to nitpick different details with the framework that are in specifically. So if you're not
yes.
coached by someone like learn from the coach who knows more, who actually this experience in teaching people can probably explain it much better up. I've had definitely people who try to share, like they've been influenced by one technique or one coach and try to share it. They've kind of inadvertently distorted it by kind of like misapplying
Yeah.
certain things. Like, well, okay, so you do this, you don't do this, and I'm like,
Yes.
well, and like I've had someone tell me, I was supposed to catch up with him later on, but it said, oh yeah, but that's wrong. And I said, well, why? Well, he said this. You mean like the guy he taught? He's like 16. Said this to you, and
Like Chinese whispers.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's started just like telephone exactly. And like, well, that's not what he said. Technically speaking, you can still do it this way. And in the end, what it comes down to is like 90% of form is the same. It's
Yeah.
yeah,
Yes. Let me leave you with something. Okay. It's important to have good technique, but it's also important to be good at your technique, right?
mm,
So like there's not one silver bullet. Okay. And every archer has its own nuances and individual details, but yeah, look at the fundamentals. And I think if anyone goes back and starts to look at it from that lens, all the top archers, they all have a stable base, they have a strong base posture. Okay. They
mm,
have excellent alignment, they have a pressure point directly into the bow, they have a solid hook in the first groove of that middle finger, they
mm,
have a solid anchor, they have smooth expansion, they have clicker control, they have a dynamic release and follow through, and I have mindset things they all have in common. So these are the things that are non-negotiables.
yep,
And then within that, you need to develop your system. And it is important to have a system. Like you can't just like randomly throw things together.
yep,
So like the KSL system, for example, is like that done well is a great system. Is it superior to other coaching systems? I don't know. You know,
yeah.
that's
We can't really say
can't
that
answer
because
that.
we
Yeah.
always say like certain people win and they use these systems, doesn't necessarily mean the system is responsible to make being winners, because there's that personal element. Just because you learn KSL doesn't mean you're the best person in your club doesn't do it. In the end, it is the archer. All right, there's no guaranteed pathway. It's up to you. You can have an inferior system, but still perform better than everybody else because you've trained harder, you've focused on the right holistic education, you've worked on your goals, you've broken down your training patterns. These things count more. The system's only there to get you a framework to work with. I think generally speaking, if you train without some kind of framework, you're missing a lot of things in your education. All right, that's what we emphasize: learning pathways, programs, evaluating where you are. We're not prescribing what you have to do, but we're giving you a framework so you know what a good hook to you feels like, what a good stance to you feels like, what a good shot tempo feels like to you. So as long as you know what to look for, you can troubleshoot and improve more rapidly and more consistently than someone who's just working with random things. Like I said before, just putting things together and just I'm copying this and this and this and this, but not really seeing how they gel together. So ultimately, no matter what system you use, the big part is it's you and how you apply yourself.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
I like that. All right, I reckon we'll sign off very shortly. So thanks to everybody who is in chat right now. By the way, I'm doing a form check perhaps next weekend. Got a lot of people asking for it. I think in the isolation has caused a lot of jitters and coaching starvation. So we're doing what we can. So in case you're wondering, if you can't email me a video, you can always upload to a Drive, a Dropbox or something. Just link it, or put it on YouTube and link it. There's been a lot of people doing that way, so feel free to make use of those functions. We're in a very unusual time right now, so having the expertise from anybody who's willing to help out would be very appreciated. Of course, Jarryd, you're welcome to join us for a live stream if you want to. You can always add your expertise. Last time we had Jake Kaminsky in chat, so he was kind of an interesting special guest cameo appearance. So hopefully we get some more stuff for you as well. Anyway, that'll be coming up. So thanks again, Jarryd. So before we head off, any advice for people right now in terms of training, especially now in isolation, and what's the pathway forward? What would you say to people who are currently in isolation and in the months ahead of us?
No, that's a really simple one. Look for the hidden opportunity.
Ooh.
So what have you been putting off? Okay, yeah, you might be able to shoot 70 meters, but for the average person I talk to, they need to go back and spend 6, 12, 18 weeks working on technique fundamentals. Here's your opportunity. Most people say, oh, I don't have time for that. Well, now you have time. So look for the hidden opportunity.
Start now, people, right? Don't wait till the last week before you head back to the club and then start doing fundamentals. Look, you got to do it now, people. So anyway, it's been an absolute pleasure, Jarryd. Thanks for coming along. It's been
thanks for inviting
me.
Amazing.
And thanks to people in chat for helping out, having a good time, asking great questions, and hopefully you all enjoyed this. And again, do check out Jarryd on his Facebook page, his website, Rogue Archery, as well as his YouTube channel, which is also Rogue Archery TV. And stay tuned for his upcoming video. I think interesting little plug there. So we've got some interesting things happening. And definitely stay engaged in archery, stay safe where you are, and hopefully we'll see you around on the range very soon. All right, take care, people. Enjoy yourselves, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks, everyone.